In the first debate, essentially this guy completely freaked out and he crashed out mid debate. It was cinema. It was amazing. It was beautiful. He looked really, really bad. Because Hasan's orbiters, because they are not used to debating, they're horrible at debating. And they crash out. They get mad really easily. Um, Now it seems like he returned for round two. We'll see how this goes. Maybe he learns how to be calm.
Fine.
We'll see.
I keep it like this. Perfect. Okay. Everyone seems to be fine. I guess the best way to start is, look, I'm not very convinced of the position of the two-state solution. So why don't you try and convince me?
Okay. So broadly speaking, my understanding is that there are two national groups that are living in that region. There's the Israelis and the Palestinians. And for whether we want to debate about the ethics of how the Israelis got there, maybe one story or the other, but the fact is that they're there and they are not going anywhere. The Palestinians are not going anywhere either, unless you want to just have a brutal ethnic cleansing campaign of one group or the other. So they're both there.
Wait. I'm really sorry. I'm not being rude. I just accidentally, they're all complaining they can't hear you.
My theory is that the more welfare a state has, the more they spend their time online and pretending that they're actually Americans and interested in American politics. Just notice, why are there so many Aussies and like Brits online, but you never see any like Arabs online? Well, the only conclusion I can draw is that these are both like heavy welfare states. So then the people online, they are welfare recipients. They are benefiting from welfare, which is why they spend all of their time online and being terminally online. It's the when your state is a welfare state, that's the only time. That's how you. That's how I can tell. That's how I can tell. That's how I can tell you're a loser. Okay. All right, that's how I can tell you're a loser. Okay. Oh. Oh. Okay, you're welcome.
So sorry, that's my fault. No, I can fix it. It's just I did something stupid. Application audio capture. Sorry. Oh, fuck's sake. There we go. Wait, do you mind speaking? I'm really sorry about that.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, there we go. Everyone can hear you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Middle Eastern people generally don't engage in English communities. Yeah, they spend their time playing Rocket League instead.
Let's start again.
So I guess I'm really sorry about that.
Okay.
Let's start again.
So you want me to convince you of why the two-state solution is the way to...
Yeah. I think that's a good position to start from.
Okay. Broadly speaking, there are two national groups in that region. Whether one side likes it or not, they're both there. They're not going anywhere unless you want to have a brutal ethnic cleansing campaign of one group or the other. I don't want that. I hope most people don't want that. And they definitely seem to have no intention of wanting to share a country together. So I think the way that we've dealt with national conflicts in the past, or the way that borders have typically worked, is that it just seems to make the most sense to have the Palestinians in their state and the Israelis in theirs. And, you know, I'm a multiculturalist. I think sectarianism is insane. It's a very stupid thing to be watching from a distance. But if you want to solve that, I think it would make much more sense for them to be living in peace and security in their two different regions. And then if they want to engage in trade with each other and reconciliation and whatever else, then hopefully that border would become less and less meaningful. But yeah, if you want them to have a state now in Palestine, then it's going to be two states, not one.
And how do you think that is reached? Like with the current Israeli government, how do you think that that's plausible? And in fact, not just the current Israeli government, like speaking about the alternatives, because in my understanding, the largest the largest outcome that wouldn't be Likud is Naftali Bennett, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't support two states. So how do we get from where we are now to a two-state solution?
I think we have to look at how we've gotten closer to it in the past. I think.
Oh my God. Okay, fine. I'll re-engage with IVP just this once. Okay, Master, allow me to not hold back just this once. I will finish the job. Okay, but I like, in my opinion, like it's better if you don't focus so much on the two-state solution part of it or the one-state solution part of it. I mean, it doesn't really matter. I think, again, the best thing that you can argue about when it comes to IVP is what is the next productive, achievable step? What is the next productive, achievable step that you can make towards betterment for everybody in the region? Forget about a two-state solution. We're not even close to it. We're assuming that, oh, there's going to be no corruption. Oh, there's going to be no money laundering. Oh, there's not going to be any underground terrorist cells that are going to spring out of nowhere and kill like thousands of people. Bro, we can't ask that question yet until we address some other issues first. Okay, I think I remember like arguing over the Golan Heights to be one of them, and the settlers in the West Bank to also be one of them, as well as the stopping the terrorizing of Palestinians in the West Bank as well, and making sure that Gaza is completely free of Hamas and establishing maybe some provisional government there while Hamas is gone, right? Yeah, I mean, like, there's a lot of other things that there's like this question of like, oh, we need to get to a two-state solution or something. Like, okay, there's a lot of other immediate issues that I think we can fix, right?
The fact is that despite what a lot of embedded like Zionist propagandists will say, for the last 100 years, Israelis have maybe for less than 10 of those been favoring a two-state solution or voted in favor of one. For the rest of the time, they voted for governments that don't want one.
In which period, sorry? Did they vote for one that did?
They voted in Barak, who promised that he wanted to solve the conflict with the Palestinians, and they voted in Olmert as well.
Okay. Yeah.
We can go into details if you want, but just broadly speaking, they've been more humoring of it in the past than they were now, and definitely before the 90s, they were not humoring it at all.
Well, see, I would kind of hold the opinion that I'm not sure really they ever humored it. I think particularly the best example would be the Oslo Accord.
No, don't get me wrong. Okay, I also hate this topic, but it's like, I don't even want to talk about this topic. Whatever, man. It doesn't matter. I mean, like, I can talk about it, but it's just that it's like me talking about transgender shit. Like, everybody is tired of talking about transgender shit. Who the fuck wants to talk about transgender shit these days? Like, or like, can you imagine? Like, yeah, I guess I can talk about trans people in sports, but like, it's such a boring topic, and you know that it's been made big on purpose by a bunch of people who are not interested in democracy in the United States, right? So it's like, what? There's just no use for me engaging in that in astroturfed issues.
Because for me, right, I can't really see any other example where Palestinians have been as close that the PLO, 100% confirmed their commitment to recognize Israel's right to exist, their desire for there to be a two-state solution, and it just didn't go anywhere. Well, it did go somewhere, which was the further Bantustanization of Palestinian territories and, the strengthening or solidification of occupation.
Do you want me to address that specifically, or do you want me to go back to what I was saying?
Yeah. I'd like to hear a way in which that wasn't the case.
In which what part? So you're thinking that from Oslo onto the 2000s, the Israelis only Bantustanized further, and were not ever humoring there being a state in the West Bank and Gaza.
I think so, yeah.
No, I'm not entirely convinced of that. I think there's an argument to be made that Camp David wasn't good enough. But given how the PLO and Arafat responded to the Clinton parameters, I think it seems pretty likely that the Israelis were more willing to put some.
Well, you also have to keep in mind that all of these issues are astroturf from Russia, right? Russia uses bots in order to, and China and Russia and all these other countries that want to see America fall. They are interested in using bots to astroturf issues that otherwise wouldn't be talked about all that often if it weren't for the bots, right? So you have to keep in mind like which issues are astroturfed on purpose in order to sow dissent and chaos in the United States discourse, right?
Thing on the table than the Palestinians were. I still to this day do not know what the Palestinian offer of a two-state solution looks like concretely. I know they said yes to frameworks, but as far as a final offer, as in this is exactly.
And in my opinion, Israel versus Palestine is 100% one of these issues. Another issue that is super astroturf is transgender shit, which is incredibly successful for foreign actors to amplify on purpose. Yeah, trans issues, pro-Palestinians, like these are issues that are 100% astroturfed, yeah.
What we want for borders, refugees, Jerusalem, security, I've not seen anything.
I think the base level is, right, accepting international law, surely. That our governments, right, because this is sort of one of the problems that I have predominantly with the two-state solution, right? Our governments will say that they want the two-state solution. They declare that Israel's occupation is illegal, that settlements of Palestinian land is illegal.
Meanwhile, we're losing our democracy.
But then they do nothing to pressure Israel in these negotiations. Like at Camp David, in my understanding,
that's not good.
There was a point at which Arafat was like, you are literally just repeating Israeli talking points. These are not even America's own talking points. And that rather than acting as like an honest broker, they acted fully as like...
And we forget that Russia versus Ukraine even exists in the first place.
Dishonest broker in favor of Israel. And I think that at this point, it's like really hard to see how when you allegedly have these Israeli governments that are moderate, and you have this Palestinian position of, okay, we'll accept basic international law. And also, in my understanding, right, I think there's a couple of different alleged proposals on the right of return. And there's one that was like 800,000 Palestinians being allowed to return, and Israel could have control over that happening. But I think that getting to these points is interesting because the main thing that hasn't stopped in with any of these governments is settlements. Like, How do we get to a point of having a two-state solution when Israel is actively undermining that through every negotiation? Like Israel, at each one of these negotiations, settlement didn't stop, and settlement has always been the key obstacle to peace because it's illegal under international law, and it is effectively operating not just as a random thing that happens. It is a thing that is continually happening directly to undermine the emergence of a Palestinian state. So I find it hard to look at any negotiation and not see that as the most important thing.
Okay, so first of all, just because there's a few things going on once there, you mentioned accept international law. When you say that they need to establish a two-state solution based on international law, what specifically do you mean?
I think probably the six-day war borders, right? Is that 242 or 338?
It's both, really. But does 242 say the exact 67 borders?
I don't know.
It basically says the opposite. It says it was so. If you look at the background to how the resolution 242 came about, Lord Caradon, I think specifically, was the main person who spoke about this. Is that if you look at the exact wording of 242, it doesn't say withdraw. First of all, it has the main principle: it's inadmissible to acquire territory through conquest. But then the second part is they say to withdraw from territories. Very strangely worded sentence. They don't say the territories or all the territories. They just say from territories occupied since the Six-Day War. And the French translation. Some people mistake it, but the way it's worded says effectively the same thing. So, and the reason they did that was because the 67 borders, really the 49 border, is not really a border at all. It's an armistice line. And it was definitely put in to be ambiguous because they wanted to anticipate that a border based on a random armistice line from just where the Arab and Jewish soldiers were in 49 doesn't really make sense. So it would be open to negotiation and land swapping and things like that. That's why it's there. 242 doesn't say to just go exactly down to the latitude. And then the third part it says that it needs to be on the grounds of mutual security and recognition. As in it needs to be compatible with each side being assured that the other won't use their...
1 year in Ukraine, more people died than 100 years of Israel and Palestine? Really? I mean, I'm not surprised. Russia is deliberately attacking civilians.
Use that state to attack the other.
Pretty depressing.
I just find it interesting, to kind of quibble with the logic of it there when it says initially that it is inadmissible to conquer territory or to seize and annex territory through conquest.
Well, that's why when it comes to law, laws are usually interpreted by the professionals and by the people who are involved in putting it down. They say it's inadmissible, but then they will also say that they say territories and not the territories, and they did that very, very intentionally. They did that intentionally because they were anticipating that whatever a Palestinian state is, it might be a little bit different to the 67 borders. It could even theoretically be bigger. Obviously, it's not been offered to be bigger, but that's why it's there. That's why it's there.
But in order for there to be a meaningful negotiation, right? In Oslo, Palestinians conceded 78% of historic Palestine on the basis of what they wanted, and 22% throughout the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. That feels like a far bigger concession than anything that Israel was willing to offer. And just being to abide by that and to take it at its interpretation of, okay, it's wrong to conquer territories, and it's clear that at this point there probably is a Palestinian group who will and have the capacity to accept a two-state solution. It feels really difficult for me to see that as it's just down to the interpretation of international law. It seems that Israel wasn't interested in giving Palestinians a state.
Well, it does seem to be back down to the borders in a way, because if you look at the details of how they negotiated in Camp David, Arafat didn't seem to care all that much about 1 or 2% of the West Bank, or even 5 or 6%. He was actually quite happy to leave that up to Bill Clinton. The sticking points of Camp David and Taba were not 1 or 2, 3, 4% of borders. The sticking points were Jerusalem and the right of return. That's where they just couldn't seem to get any. And you said 800,000 refugees. To my understanding, I don't think Arafat ever, or Abbas, ever said, this is the refugee settlement we will accept. That they've never said that.
Yeah, I heard Finkelstein.
Arafat was like the old motherfucker, right? Sorry, that sounded so stupid. I'm sorry. Arafat was he was the old Palestinian guy, right? The old Palestinian leader guy that was not very good, right? Palestine, I think that Palestinians have always had horrible leaders, right?
Say that. So when he was debating
Yikes.
Ben-Ami ages ago. But I'm going to be frank, I've never really been that interested in these two negotiations. They've never been the key points of what I've studied. But I think even then, at Camp David, right, how could Arafat have gone back to his people and said, look, I've not got sovereignty over the Al-Aqsa Mosque?
Yeah, he was former leader, would say one thing to the West and then encourage violence to his own people.
It's a very important thing for Muslims.
Why?
You must recognize that surely. The Al-Aqsa Mosque matters a lot. It's the third holiest site in Islam. I'm sure you know.
Bro is throwing a 10k gold lead.
But Arafat was sort of expected to just go back to his people and be like, yeah, sorry, I haven't got that. Because if you look at what Arafat said to Madeleine Albright and Clinton before Camp David was called, he said, look, we can't actually call this because the Israelis are not ready to negotiate on the positions that we want. Please don't call it. It is not a position and a good time to call this. And then Clinton calls it. And the sticking point of Jerusalem is not really that surprising, right? That it's, Palestine's, it's such a center of Palestine, they want it as the capital, and kind of getting rid of that is impossible for Arafat. No country can really give up their capital city where the most important.
Say Israel does annex Gaza and the West Bank, the resentment isn't going to end. Israel can't offer full citizenship to everyone in Gaza and the West Bank because it would change the Jewish character of Israel. Well, I mean, again, this is commonly already said, but you can make an argument that all the Palestinians, Palestinians would then vote for the genocide of the Jews, right? they would vote for the genocide of all Israelis, right? They would vote, yeah, because they outnumbered them.
important center of life is for so many people.
Well, then why did he? I agree. Why did he say no to Ben Ami's offer in Taba then? Ben Ami offered the idea of vertical sovereignty, as in the Israelis would have sovereignty over the wall and the holiest Jewish areas, like surrounding the compound, but then the top of it, like because they do this in maritime law sometimes with vertical sovereignty. But then when they said Al-Aqsa would have gone sovereign to the Palestinian state, so even when Ben Ami said that, when he was offered vertical sovereignty, meaning that the compound and the Dome of the Rock goes to the Palestinians, Arafat still said no. And the reason he said no is that because was saying yes to that would entail acknowledging that the Jewish temple existed underneath Al-Aqsa, and he said no to that. That has always been an issue with the Palestinian side, is that they've never even accepted that the Western Wall or the temple is even there, that it's valid, right?
In my understanding, there's also a threat to accepting that, right? Like, it's now reached a point where it is openly talked about by Israeli government figures of demolishing the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and that came specifically at a time when Netanyahu opened the tunnel under Al-Aqsa, which threatens its structural integrity, in my understanding. And so I can kind of see why Arafat might have been like, actually, I really don't want that. I don't want a recognition of the temple underneath, because it is a direct threat to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. But also, in my understanding, Arafat didn't walk away. He asked, right, for like specifics. He asked for maps and all of these things at Taba, and then it was more Sharon who torpedoed it, right?
One thing at a time. So it's weird that he would say no, considering that it's still a threat to have.
I think that I think the fucking settlers should definitely get the fuck out. I think that there is very little excuse for their behavior at the very least. Yeah, the settling of the West Bank. I just don't really find any real arguments for it. I have heard arguments in favor of it. Back then, I used to debate this guy named Quibbles, who would make arguments in favor of settling in the West Bank. He is one of the most Jewish-looking motherfuckers I've ever seen. And Quibbles would make arguments like, "Oh, the Jewish monks, it's their religious right to be around these places that are important to their belief." Motherfucker, there's literally cult-like religious beliefs that believe in cannibalism and death and human sacrifices. Like, we might as well bring back the Aztec, like, fucking sun worshipping, like, heart tearing out shit if we're gonna take like religious opinions seriously, right? Like, what the fuck, bro? Like, it's not like you can't make that justification. And that was like his go-to. That was literally his go-to. And then one of the things that I remember asking is, why can't Israel just build higher buildings? Why can't Israel just like build on Israel proper? Why does it have to be the West Bank, right? And his response was, well, there's a lot of old temples underneath that you don't want to build more mass upon, because otherwise you would collapse the temples, or some shit. And then I'm just like, motherfucker. Bro, then collapse them. I don't give a fuck. What the fuck? Well, where is this made-up issue? Like, why are you saying this? Yeah, well, just really silly. I mean, like, dude, ultimately, like, I'm all for defending Israel against, the Hasan heads, right? The Hasanabi heads. But sometimes I'm like debating people back then, and they're like legitimately pretty wild. They're whiting out, okay, on the pro-Zionist, because I think when Stephen was debating the fucking pro-Palestinians, he got a lot of hardcore Zionists, like over Zionists, like super Zionists, to join his community, and then like we have to cull my viewer base. I had to do it to him. I had to implement the last decision. Stop. Okay, that's enough edgy jokes. Okay, bro, dude. I'm sorry. I disavow, okay, in Minecraft and Roblox. Bro. Because there was this one person who was a legitimate soldier, I think, a civilian soldier, IDF, I think. And he pulled the trigger and shit. And he argued that all Israelis should control the roads. They should control all the roads. And he wants to bring back the Sultanate in order to satisfy the Palestinian population. And I'm like, what are you on about, mate? What are you talking about? Make some sense, please. Sorry. But honestly looking back, I think that might actually not be a bad idea. I don't know, because some of them are just not ready for democracy. They don't believe in democracy. After all, like, democracy is what brought them Hamas, right? So I kind of understand that. Yeah, I kind of understand that. Now that, like, I'm looking back, but it's too late. All right. But yeah. IP is the worst discourse ever because all the normal people peace out after a month because it's like, both these folks are cooked. Uh-huh. Yep. Ugh. Yeah. Well,
vertical sovereignty because of excavation. Obviously, like fuck
it's not an overpopulation issue. I know there should be no excuse to just build higher buildings.
Netanyahu and Likud, right? But the problem is that excavation was actually part of the deal as well. Part of the Clinton parameters was that excavation would have to be agreed by both sides if they were ever going to do it. I mean, Palestinian leaders since Al Hussein.
Oh yeah. I think someone called I think when Quibbles was debating Destiny, Quibbles was called settler mindset. He people called him the guy with the settler mindset, and then I would call jokingly the IDF soldier that debated us to be the settler grindset because he literally was the one pulling the trigger. So we would call him the settler grindset because, like, sometimes he'll be like, "Oh no, the reason why I was gone for these few weeks was because I was busy killing people." It's like,
Have been since the 1800s have been saying that Zionists want to come and demolish Al-Aqsa. They haven't done it yet, and it would be much harder for them to do it in a peace process.
yeah.
No, that's not why Arafat said no to it. Arafat said no to that because he doesn't believe that the Jewish temple exists there.
Okay. I mean, in my understanding, I've heard some people say that there's no actual archaeological evidence being found of it.
Which people say that?
I heard a PhD student at Exeter say it.
Interesting. I'm pretty sure it's beyond dispute, but okay.
Like, frankly, I'll be frank with you at that part. I don't actually fully know as to whether that's true. He said that. But what I will say specifically about this is, I understand that during a peace negotiation that may be unthinkable. But let's be real, like, Netanyahu and the right were quite likely to come back, and they did come back. Just
Our person's a hero. Yeah, I would say he's a pretty good person. I think that person was actually a part of the he was part of a pro-Palestinian kind of reintroduction, remodeling kind of. Yeah, he was actually part of a pro-Palestinian group in Israel before October 7th. And it's not that his opinions have changed, but he has a different idea of how to bring statehood back to the Palestinians. He has a different idea. It's not like he doesn't want rights for Palestinians, but I think that he has his own bizarre, like, world building ideas. It's just like, okay,
did Sharon torpedo the negotiations, right? Because when does Taba end?
Taba ends when with Sharon and also Clinton leaving office as well. But everyone knew this would happen. So that's why it was very imperative to get it done quickly, which is why the delayed response to the Clinton parameters was an issue. And also the endless list of reservations from the PLO was an issue as well. Yeah, I'm not going to support Sharon either. But the problem is, again, is that this opportunity that's why there was so much pressure, more international pressure on any leader to accept a peace deal ever, really, than there was on Arafat to accept Camp David or to counteroffer it. But they didn't. And as far as map clarification, that's to do with Abbas, not to do with Arafat.
Okay, well, I think also another interesting point about all of this is that these negotiations had to have very specific dynamics because, in my understanding, the Oslo Accords are about 300 pages long. They're filled with, like, very complex legal jargon, and that's part of the reason that, they ended up achieving nothing. They kicked down the road the can of refugees' right of return, which, like, Palestinians deserve the right to return, right? Like, they do deserve the right to return, and I'm sorry, I'm unconcerned.
No. At this point, I mean, do black people deserve reparations? I would argue no, right? Not in the traditional way. Because it's too late. There's so much blood mixing and there's so many generations and years that have passed by that it's really hard to debate, like, what percentage of money goes to what percentage of people. It's too hard. The logistics are too hard. In addition to the logistics being too hard, it is, like, one of the most inefficient ways to do it, right? Inefficient ways to fix the modern issue. I don't even think it would fix any issue, right? You need to teach, like, financial literacy to people in order to figure out, like, these kinds of things. Yeah. But for the right of return, maybe for people in the immediate 10 years on the West Bank, I'm assuming, like, the people who have been driven out of their homes by fucking Israeli settlers, yeah, they probably deserve to have their property returned to them. It's quite unhinged that, like, the Israeli settlers are just essentially bandits. They threaten to kill the Palestinian family who is peacefully living there, just to take their house. Yeah, that's quite absurd. Yes. Yeah.
by the demographics of Israel. Israel is continually importing
Like in the immediate past, yeah, probably.
huge amounts of like Jewish people, and sometimes not even Jewish people. You know, in the case of the huge amounts of
Like all the way back to the Nakba? That's impossible. You can't do that. How many things have been destroyed, rebuilt, transferred ownership, split costs, and the logistics behind that like has to be done. Too much, right?
Soviets, like ex-Soviet Jewish people who are allowed to bring their spouses over and such. There's about 1 million in the 1990s. And so for me, I can't ever really conceptualize why the Palestinians demanding the right of return is such like a ridiculous or an outrageous thing to keep that as a focus. And especially, I think like Arafat also was particularly interested in Lebanese, Palestinians who resided in Lebanon because of what the Lebanese people had given to him and the role he'd played in their society.
Yeah, I think it might be in the Clinton parameters or in the Israeli response to the Clinton parameters, but I think either one of those sides agreed that Lebanese refugees would have priority because of how they're treated in Lebanon. Makes sense. Okay, but this brings us to a much more broad issue. You acknowledge that if full right of return happens, there's no more Israel. There's just 2 Palestinian states.
Yeah, and okay. I think that ultimately that's right. But the reason that I feel that way is because I would rather invest in like the impossible. Because for me, frankly, the 2-state solution is impossible. And the reason I say this, right, is because I think the 2-state solution maybe could have happened at some point if there had been major pressure put on Israel. But no one was really willing to do it. Like Carter knew that the settlements were the major issue. Begin just went and increased the number of.
Okay, so he's just completely unserious. This guy's just completely unserious. Like I thought, you know, there's just no use having a conversation like this if it like if you're just gonna say something like that. The people who advocate for like the people who advocate for one state solutions are not serious people. Like you're not here to have a serious discussion, in my opinion. Like I just don't think you're here to have a serious discussion. You're not here to have a serious discussion. You're here to virtue signal, right? Oh, I think this should happen because it is just simply right. It's morally right. Motherfucker, how about realistic? Hello? Maybe what's realistic is more morally right than what you consider to be morally right because it's faster to get to and it's more it's better for a larger number of people for me, right? Like, yeah, I don't know. Like for anybody, like even
settlements. Rabin increased the number of settlements. Everyone has increased the number of settlements, and the international community does nothing about it. I mean, I think it's best described as kind of like winking at the settlers. They're like, oh, no, you can't do this settlement thing, Israel. But here's unlimited money. Even when there was frozen loan guarantees, I think, was that in the... Yeah, it was Shamir's government. Yeah, and it was linked to the settlement issue, but then they kind of just...
I thought they were going to have a more... Actually, maybe he was saying bullshit the entire time. Maybe I wasn't... Maybe it's because like my knowledge is limited, so this is why like I'm not able to counter all of his points or anything like that. Obviously, Lonerbox seems to be. I assume he's doing a good job. I have no idea, but like, but yeah, like the moment I hear like you're not for a 2-state solution, there's just nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do for you, or maybe you're not talking about the next productive step.
Didn't care.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm so much
not
more in
a
favor of,
serious
say, a 1-state
actor.
solution rather than a 2-state. Because, like, I appreciate and understand that Arafat is not perfect. I don't think he should have signed the Oslo Accords in the first place. I think it was a terrible idea. I think in, like, some people's readings of it, particularly Seth Anziska, he says the Washington Accords, the Washington negotiations, the Madrid summit, were actually looking more likely to get peace because the Palestinians were very clear on what their red lines were, whereas Arafat didn't give any of those red lines. But sorry, I kind of made a multitude of points there. But I think that the thing I'm saying about 1-state is I would rather invest in the impossible, you know, and I would rather have the hope that there could be a better Middle East. I would rather hope that the Middle East doesn't have to always be dominated by these sectarian nation states and that human beings can live in peace and equality.
Yeah, so if you're talking about impossibility, are we saying impossible? I know that impossible just means it's going to be an oxymoron, but are we talking about like a spectrum of impossibility? Like, do you think the 2-state and 1-state solution are equally impossible or one's more possible? Or like...
I think in the current world order, the changes that are required for there to be a 2-state solution would probably just end up being more likely to move towards a 1-state solution. Interesting.
Okay. Maybe a broad take about sectarian stuff. So obviously when you look at sectarianism from a distance, it looks ridiculous. It looks like, why the fuck are you fighting over these like some of it's just arbitrary, some of it's ahistorical, some of it's just like a long time ago. Like all these disputes just look insane. Like I'm Lebanese. I've seen it with my own family and people I know. Like sectarianism it's a cancer. The problem is that when you see sectarian groups and they're all dug into their positions and they're very aggressive and they're very aggressively defensive, it makes sense to say that they should all stop and be multicultural. It doesn't make sense to go to one group and tell them to lower their guard and just let the other one and just hope that the other one will reciprocate. So when it comes to, that's why I would never tell Palestinians to just like completely throw down their arms regardless of any context, right? If you've got settlers coming in and encroaching on your territory, you should be allowed to chase them away, with whatever means you want, fuck them. But when it comes to the Israeli side, when we talk about demographic concerns of Israelis are not invalid. Like the problem with nationalism is, especially if you're Jewish, nationalism as a whole is not good for outgroups as it is. It's good for in-groups, it's not good for outgroups. That was the whole issue of the 20th and 19th century nationalism. Arab nationalism did not show any indication in the 20th century that it was going to be massively different for Jewish people. I just don't understand this idea where we think that Jews would exist in as a minority in the Middle East, especially if the majority is Palestinians, the one group that probably has more of an excuse to be anti-Semitic than any other group in the region. Why?
My biggest contention is that Lonerbox gave this guy way too much charity, and Lonerbox admitted the same afterwards to the debate, watching Cundler's stream. I mean, maybe, but you also have to keep in mind that this guy, he got blown the fuck out. He got blown the fuck out during his first debate with Lonerbox. For him to come back is already pretty admirable, I would say. Like, the fact that he even came back in the first place is actually pretty admirable. Because most people wouldn't even come back, right?
That would be anything other than like how that would guarantee multiculturalism and not just sectarian violence, but in the other way around.
Because I think, like, I don't wish to sort of lie in favor of the Ottoman Empire. I think that whole notion of tolerance was bullshit. That it basically only operated on the principle of, well, we'll be tolerant to you as long as you're doing what we're saying. That's like how they were tolerant. They were like sometimes, like almost instantaneously, someone could go from being a Christian accepted in the, you know, like the Ottoman vision of what wanted, like the Ottoman vision of society, to just being swapped instantly if you did something that was against the Ottoman Empire. Like, I think the best examples are really groups like the Kurds or the ones that I've read about. And sorry, I've completely lost my train of thought. Oh wait, sorry. I think that generally in the Middle East, the treatment of Jewish people is incomparable to that of Europe. Like Europe, what Europe did for generations to Jewish people, and continued doing, that culminated really in the Holocaust. Until after that point, Europeans to a large extent were like, well, we need to prevent that ever happening again. And since then, you know, there's been a decent amount of protection of Jewish people that's developed, and I think that that's a good and positive thing. But I just think this belief that, you know, Arabs can't stop.
The funniest part is that this British guy is like trying to argue on the behalf of Palestinians. Meanwhile, it was because of the Brits that like this mess happened in the first place. Is because they weren't taking anything seriously and they didn't give a fuck. So this is why everything happened in the first place. So it's just kind of funny that like, oh well, I care about this. No, motherfucker, your fucking country, your ancestors are the ones that fucked up this entire place, bro.
Being sectarian doesn't really fit with how, you know, the Europe and how America are ending up.
Well, it took Europe an entire world war to get over their sectarianism, and obviously it took most of the Jews leaving for them to stop caring that much about Jews. When it comes to the Arab world, I don't think Arabs are inherently sectarian. Of course they're not. The problem is that we're expecting one group to give up, to lower their guard, and just hope that the other one does the same, or it reciprocates a peaceful offer, which I just don't think will happen. As far as European anti-Semitism goes, you're right. The Arab world was not anything near as what Europe was in the 20th century. But we also know that Arab leaders were not immune to European anti-Semitism, because obviously things like blood libel started to come into Damascus in the late 1800s. We know that there was actually one blood libel case, a very minor one, but it happened in Jerusalem, and it was actually backed by Muslim clerics. We know that obviously al-Husseini, a very popular figure in Palestine, was just a flat-out Nazi. We know that his cousin, the head of the Palestine Congress, believed in stab in the back myth. He believed that the Bolsheviks were... Yes.
Really?
Yeah, he believed that the Bolshevik revolution was done by Jews, and also that the stab in the back was done by Jews, yeah.
I'd never heard that about Musa Kazim, actually.
Now, he did moderate later, obviously. There's a bit of a rumor that he was bribed by Zionists. I don't know. Not confirmed.
Who wrote about that? I'd be interested to hear.
For that particular
because I've seen like a much more sympathetic reading of Musa Kazim. But just on this topic, right? I feel like in terms of Palestinians, they are expected to lay down their arms, right? Like, they did in the West Bank. The one-gun policy instituted by Abbas pretty much disarmed all militants in the West Bank. Yeah, there are still a small number of militant groups like the Lion's Den in Jenin, but like organized resistance doesn't really exist in the same way in the West Bank. And the thing is that Israel didn't lay down their arms. It was, and the international community over and over again expects of Palestinians to lay down their arm. Even the most leftist Israeli, right? Like the person.
Here's a real sad take. The nations of the Middle East love their ethno and religiousness states. Nothing will change until this is fixed. And they hate each other. I think that's probably another part that people need to acknowledge, is that they actually hate each other. It's not like all these guys like each other. Dude, if anybody was willing to take in the Palestinians already, they would have already done it. If any of them were like pro-immigration or pro like introducing more people, then they would have done so already. Like, who the fuck is saying no to that? Like, who would ever say no? Who would ever say no to, like, if like, what hurdle did they have to go through, right? Begin the immigration process now. But, you know, over all these years, all of these countries claim that they care about the Palestinians. Meanwhile, they refuse to let them into any of their countries, and they still use them as an excuse to slander and attack Israel. So it's like, sounds like you're not really taking things seriously. You know what I mean?
who's an outsider, Yair Golan, what he actually believes is that they should still have like military dominance over any Palestinian state, right? So like my problem
Sounds
is
like
the
you
basic
just
premise of
dislike
the
Jewish people.
only two-state solution that we're going to get in the context of like the really existing Israel is one where Palestinians have to lay down their arms, but Israel still gets to keep its really powerful military.
So that can get you into a debate about what, like, just like the power imbalances that already exist, or like factual realities on the ground. I can put it bluntly if you want. Like, the fact is that Israelis benefit from violence. Like, Israeli right wingers, at least, they benefit from a degree of violence happening in the region because they'll win and they'll use it to get more territory. Palestinians do not benefit from violence in the slightest. Like, maybe there are some edge.
It's still wild how Turkey pushes Palestine so hard while getting away with bombing Kurds. Yeah, makes you think. Also, like, again, like, I have to reiterate, like, the fucking Arab countries fucking hate each other. Where do you think the Yemen, like, where do you think the Yemen war came from? Like, why do you think the Yemen war is so messy? It didn't just come from nowhere, right? Do you know how many, like, Game of Thrones backstabs happened for the Yemenis war on their own side, in their own alliances? If only you knew. If only you understood.
Cases of people chasing settlers away or disrupting infrastructure, but obviously, just broadly speaking, do we agree that Hamas's strategy and the Axis strategy was a total failure?
What do you mean? What do you mean a total failure?
For achieving Palestinian dignity, rights, anything?
I think it depends what you look at their aims as. If you take their aims as achieving Palestinian sovereignty, then yeah, you're probably right. Right now, they're in a horrendous situation. However, if you look at the other aims of Sinwar, that is like kind of placing the Palestinian national cause back at the top of the agenda, delegitimizing Israel, and generally showing the world what Israel is actually like, the things that it had already been doing in the West Bank, you know, it accelerated them definitely in Gaza.
This guy's not serious. It's so clear to me this guy is not serious. Oh, what's even the point? Like, it's so clear that you're not going to get anything productive out of this. Like, he isn't taking things seriously, bro.
But the structure of mass killing, mass oppression did not start after October the 7th. And so in terms of like Hamas's aim of defeating and destroying Israel, I think they knew fully that that was implausible on October the 7th. However, what I will say is that like in terms of the aim of like delegitimizing Israel, I don't think Israel's ever been in a worse position right now. I think it's something like 40% of American Jews even think that Israel is committing genocide or committed genocide in the Gaza Strip. The amount of young Jewish people who you now see speaking out and generally opposing Israel in a way that didn't exist before has grown hugely. And I would say consciousness amongst the general population.
They're probably all non-religious, but, you know, that's neither here nor there.
Of like a country like ours. I mean, I know you live in Scotland. Maybe you're a bit of a Braveheart guy, but I don't know. I think that the thing is that like if you look at the general consciousness, the opinion of Israel is in the gutter, and I think it will increasingly become difficult for even say for like governments to cling to it. I think it's a major problem of the Labour Party that it still feels a need to cling to Israel and not offer any significant change on policy against Israel. And I think even for the Republican Party in the US, like as these young Republicans grow up, it's a worrying thing. Like I think that all of this stuff is troubling. And I think that it is only a problem that will grow for Israel. And I'm sorry if this seems like a contrived explanation, but I don't think we can frame it exclusively through armed struggle is going to achieve instantaneously the aim of dignity and a state. But I think that in other ways it has achieved the things that Sinwar kind of thought, I'm going to do this because of that.
Yeah, and that's great if you but obviously that's great if you believe that the Israeli opinion doesn't matter. Like, we're not going to treat this like apartheid South Africa. We're not going to consider the opinions of the people who have the power and actually are going to turn things over. Because obviously that approach was very much, we need to assure, like at least in part, they needed to assure the white population that there was a future for them in the country, that they were not going to just get subject to revenge killings, and it was going to be about peace, reconciliation, nation building. If we don't care about that from the Israeli side, then you can have all the international pressure you want. The fact is that you have a population there that, one, for whether they're correct or not, they see themselves as indigenous, but more importantly, they see themselves as with their backs to the wall and with nowhere else to go. So if all you're going to do is disempower Israel and isolate them on the world stage, well, who benefits from that in Israel? The right-wingers do. The right-wingers are the ones who constantly go to Israeli left-wingers and say, look, no one likes us. Everyone fucking hates us. That's the only way that we can ever stand strong is if we are aggressive and if we are assertive, and we don't let people build up infrastructure and military stuff over in South Lebanon and Gaza. Every time we see a new tunnel or a new weapons import, we're going to blow it up right away. We're not going to let them amass 2,000 rockets or 200,000 like last time. We're just going to keep expanding to the West Bank because fuck them. They don't want peace anyway. That all benefits the right wing in Israel. They love that. So you're never going to get rid of that one single issue, is that you have this group that sees themselves with their backs on the wall and with nowhere else to go, and they're going to be as aggressive as possible to assert that position. And those are the ones that get more popular. And you cannot be an Israeli left-winger in an environment where the entire world is shitting on you. Meanwhile, groups like Hamas or Al-Aqsa Marches or PIJ or anyone else are kind of just getting almost a pass or just getting little condemnations every now and then, but can mostly just kind of go on and keep on doing what they're doing. And there's no broad ideological shift from either region. Same with the West Bank as well. Like, one of the reasons they're so embedded in the West Bank is it's not just because of wanting settlers wanting land. That's obviously one reason. But another reason is that they think as soon as they leave the West Bank, Hamas comes into power, and then it'll be a place 15 or 16 times bigger than Gaza, taken over by a group that wants to militarize the entire region. So you're not going to get rid of that perception.
But I think one thing I find really difficult to to take that into account is the Palestinian Authority engaged in a heavy crackdown on Hamas in like 2009. They arrested thousands of Hamas members. They arrested people who were sympathetic to Hamas. They closed charities. They arrested preachers who they gave gave sermons that were too pro-Hamas. And so like I'm sorry, I don't feel the need to pander to the feelings of like the Israelis. Like I don't.
What? Dude, is there any free speech in Gaza? You get publicly executed by Hamas if you speak out against Hamas. What, bro? Why are we comparing? Oh well, there's no free speech. There's no free speech in Israel. Motherfucker. Hamas is like fucking executing motherfuckers in the streets for protesting Hamas. What the? Yeah, it was silly.
When you don't. And I think that also I understand like the opposition to these right-wing, like largely religious fundamentalist organizations in general. However, none of them engage in a structure of violence that is comparable to Israel. And I think the bigger problem isn't like what the Western left are saying. I think the bigger
Yeah, okay, but like, what about Hamas?
problem is that our governments continue to cling to this genocidal country, this country that, you know, is in violation of so many laws, engages in apartheid, violates international law constantly. And I think it needs to have its back to the wall. I think that that's how Israelis need to feel. And I don't care if the right benefits, because I think that ultimately what
They already feel that though. It's not like they aren't feeling that. Like, everybody hates Israel, bro. Like, not gonna lie. Like, who the fuck? Like Israel is not hip and cool. Like, I'm like, what do you want me to say? They don't have the black boy swag. Okay, they don't have they don't have the cool factor. You know what I mean? They don't have the swag. Okay, they don't have the coolness. You know what I mean? Yeah, like, bro. They're not hip and cool. Like, the fucking hot IDF soldiers was the only thing that got so far. And even then, it was, like, cringe and corny. It's like, yeah, Israel got no motion, bro. Yeah, Israeli politicians do not aura farm. They can't aura farm. The only person who can aura farm is probably, like, Netanyahu whenever he appears in a speech. But everybody else is a bunch of cornballs.
has to happen is Israel has to be held to account. And those right-wingers are just an expression of things that the Israeli left do and then hide it. Like, I think a good example is Sabra and Shatia. Sabra and Shatia, yes, was basically Sharon's plan. But when Sharon is about to be held to account, he goes to Rabin, he goes to the leader of Labour at that time, whose name I have somehow, it escapes me, don't know. Do you know the answer in the 80s, the leader of Labour?
In 82?
Shafir?
Honestly, if you can't even do good propaganda, maybe it's just time to give up, okay? Look, it's just better to close your mouth than, you know, than to look really stupid.
Was it? No,
Yeah,
no.
not Shamir. You're thinking of Perez, but was he in 82?
Perez. I think it was Perez.
No
But
hate,
anyway,
of
let's just
course.
say Perez. He turns to them and says, "You trained the phalangists. You used them in Tel al-Zata. You sent them in, and now you're moralizing on us for doing it in Sabra and Shatia, just because there's outrage, basically because of the size of the invasion of Lebanon." And so I think I find this really hard to be so worried about the Israeli right when the Israeli left are doing the same things. You know, settlements expanded under Rabin.
More sexy Jewish rappers? Bro, just implement more of black culture, okay? Like Western black culture, and then you'll get it, bro. You'll understand why everybody loves it. Dude, where does Eastern Asian street fashion come from? Compton. Where does hip hop come from? Compton. Where does everything cool come from? Compton. Los Angeles, Compton. Just steal the culture from Compton, okay? Go, shoo. All right, it's really easy.
Settlements expanded under. They started under Labour prime ministers. Yitzhak Rabin during his first
Everybody
term had
thinks
the
it's
most progressive
cool.
settlement drive in the 1970s, and sure, it's expanded by Begin once he gets into power, but it's not like it wasn't
Compton,
happening.
sorry.
And so I think that Israel as a country and as Zionism as an ideology has to be held to account because it's not producing any differences. Like, I'm sorry, it's just not.
I mean, these differences are there if you just like they're
Just put the
they are
Compton in the
there.
bag,
When it comes to
bro.
settlements,
Exactly.
obviously, before the 6-Day War, I think there was one person in the cabinet who had big ideas about going into the West Bank and actually taking it over, and it was Dayan. The other ones didn't really. Like that's why they tried to get the Jordanians to stop shooting on them before they went in. When it comes to settlements afterwards, Rabin, when he semi-froze settlements, he made a delineation, whether you agree with it or not, between security and political settlements. Even Barak didn't do that. And also, if we talk about settlement expansion,
sorry, could I just ask a question? When is that the one in the 70s? The like
no,
was
Rabin.
that
This is
when he
Rabin in
made
the
the
90s. This is when
Okay.
he was in office in the 70s. Or he wasn't.
He was. Rabin was in office in
Not prime
74,
minister.
74. Wasn't he prime minister 74 to 77?
No, not Yitzhak. Was he? I might be wrong.
I
Actually.
think so. Yeah. I think you may just be wrong about that.
Okay, I'm talking about.
I think
Core
he
of
was absolutely corrupt.
Discord.
But just. I mean, actually, I'll let you continue.
Yeah, I'll continue. So, yeah, in the
Listen,
90s,
I want
after the
Israelis
Oslo
to be
Accords is when
blacker.
Rabin
Me
decides
too.
to delineate between security and political settlements, and he stops with the ones that he considers to be political, as in like the ones that are anywhere past the green line. He's not interested in allowing them to continue. Even Barak didn't do that. We also, I mean, whether you agree with it or not, the fact is that had Camp David or Clinton parameters or even especially Olmert's plan been
Was that anime where the main character in a vending machine is
accepted, we know that settlements would have been dismantled, especially anything beyond the green line and pretty much all the ones like that are several miles past the green line would have been gone, and the other ones wouldn't have been allowed to expand. So we know that those offers have existed. And in any case, when you're talking about the Palestinian, there's a few points again. The PA Hamas crackdown. Again, I think we also both know that if Israel just unilaterally yeeted themselves out of the West Bank tomorrow, then Hamas would win an election, or they would take power by force. They are easily the most popular party in that territory. We also, again, if we're talking about you don't care about what Israelis think, and you don't care about the left wing winning over the right wing, and you just want them to be to their backs of the wall until they concede something. What exactly are you expecting the Israelis to concede that there's any realistic option of them doing? What are they going to concede?
I think that once you take away the ability to just have a racist apartheid state, that Israelis start conceding huge amounts. Once you start feeling the consequences of having an occupation, no longer getting loan guarantees from America, unlimited weaponry, the protection of the US, I think all of a sudden that Israel does start conceding. There are historical moments when this happened. Begin says to Reagan, he talks to Reagan about it's in August of 1982. The second that there's a threat of the US cutting support for them, Israel starts acting. This just has never really happened, because in the current status quo, the fact is Israel is better to have as an ally, and so we're always going to keep appeasing it. However, there is something that I wanted to address there. The reason for the popularity of Hamas is pretty evident, by the way. It's because the Palestinian...
Oh my god. Here we go again.
Authority and the two-state solution lacks any legitimacy in the West Bank because it has not offered any improvements to Palestinians' lives. It categorically has not. They spend their time cracking down on Palestinians. They don't protect them from settlers. They do nothing but enshrine this situation where a small elite enrich themselves over and over again in Ramallah, whilst the rest of Palestinians live in a situation where they're generally incredibly unsafe and are living a totally abnormal existence. The PA really just stabilizes this horrendous existence. So it's not really surprising that an alternative who reject the two-state solution, who still engage in armed resistance and would allegedly represent a threat to, the settlers, are the legitimate choice. I think it's kind of Hamas would take over. Yeah, but because of the context in which we exist. And once Israel takes meaningful, very serious steps of being right, settlements are frozen. That is the base premise of any negotiation. Not that, we're only building defensive and offensive ones, because Rabin lied about that during his, it was more the Labour who came before, and they called it the stockade and watchtower mode of settlement. It wasn't a legitimate thing. And the settlements continued expanding anyway beyond what they claimed it would be. And so I think I just sit here and I see this thing of Hamas would be elected and Israelis are scared about that. But it's a product of the occupation. The anxieties that Israelis feel are products of dispossessing people. People don't give up their land for free. People don't get subjected to occupation for decades and then have negotiations where the other side is still expanding settlements, taking away your land, your resources, and then just go, okay, yeah, that's kind of fine for us. I'm sorry. It's really hard for me to take into account those anxieties when they're a product of what Israel is and does.
Okay, so that seems to be that your position is that Palestinians, even if it came to, their right to not have ever counteroffered a kind of two-state solution, their right to just keep on going. But again, okay, if we're talking about Palestinian armed resistance keeping up and making it popular, do you think if Hamas got elected in the West Bank that Palestinians in that territory would be safer or more in danger from Israeli reprisals? I'm asking that rhetorically because we obviously know that if Hamas are there in the West Bank, that's a territory that is much more... I don't know why you're saying that the security idea on the Green Line is not valid. These are literally hilltops that are just a few miles away from all of the major cities in Israel. Of course it has a meaning. It's much more of a threat than anything that could come out of Gaza. The fact is that when this space is granted to... that when Hamas have this opportunity, they militarize. They put that way in front of any kind of development of infrastructure.
It gets worse. The leftist retardation doom spirals. Oh my god, bro! What?
Structure or allowing people to try and build a better life or education or anything like that. They put it on military installations and tunnels sprawling across the entire place. You were wrong earlier when you said that you don't think the Sinwar or the Al-Qassam brigades didn't expect to overwhelm Israel. We don't actually know what they expected because given Sinwar's rhetoric and given what was actually said on the day by Mohammed Deif, we know that they were calling on the rest of the Arab world and especially they were calling on Palestinians inside Israel. They were calling on the West Bank and on Hezbollah to join into the fight right there and then because the time was now and they saw that Israel was, because of the Supreme Court reforms, that they were at an all-time level of weakness. They thought that was the opportunity and we don't know. Maybe they did think they were going to win because the way that they were talking and the way that they fired up their soldiers definitely sounded like that. Had what they wanted happened, had 1 or 2 million Palestinian Israelis decided to rise up as well, had the West Bank risen up, had Hezbollah decided to unload on October 7th, had the militia groups in Syria decided to try and fire in, maybe they would have. Maybe they would have had Iran join in the same day and launch their ballistic missiles. Yeah, maybe they would have. But again, I don't think you really... I think maybe I'm being a bit presumptuous, but I don't think you would care. I think you'd be okay with October 7th just continuing all the way until Israel's gone, regardless of how many people died in the process.
I mean, I think it kind of depends in the context of what happens, right? I don't want mass civilian casualties. I don't. Unfortunately, the problem with me and what I think of Israel as a structure and a society is Israel has always premised itself on eliminating the indigenous people. There are some changes that occur at the start. There are some different modes of settlement tried. But if you look into the logic of, say, something like the Jewish National Fund and the early Zionist organizations there, they basically try and do away with the Palestinians. But
no, not the October 7th justification. No.
On the topic of, I really want to go back to a couple of things you said there about Gaza, because I think that they're so important. Now, tunnels were first made for smuggling, I believe.
Why does he sound like women? All British bongers who are this young sound like women.
Tunnels were made to smuggle things because they were living in a siege, right? They were in this situation where, Israel withdrew, but they reconstituted around Gaza's border. They instituted a crippling siege of the area, and the tunnels were initially used for smuggling. Israel never stopped acquiring huge amounts of weaponry. So are you really surprised that a group whose legitimacy was premised on the notion, well, look, we've driven the settlers out through armed resistance. That's why Israel views these settlements as no longer necessary. Whether that's true or not, whether it came down to just Sharon wanting to freeze the peace process in formaldehyde, I believe someone close to him said. But ultimately, Hamas are engaging engaging with these things, and Hamas have legitimacy because of the occupation, right? Like, I don't think it's hard to see that like the PA have lost so much legitimacy through collaboration, through offering Palestinians nothing, and that, you know, in Gaza, whatever it may be, they don't live under the yoke directly of Israeli occupation. But on the second thing, I am so perplexed. Like, I am so perplexed by the notion that Palestinians could have built a better society in Gaza, right? Like, it was under a crippling siege. Like, surely that's something you admit, first of all. But second of all, the de-development, the economic destruction of the Gaza Strip largely happened during the Israeli occupation. This is written about by Sarah Roy. She talks about economic de-development that occurs, and largely the permit system that Israel had for a while. Now, the permit system operated so beneficially for Israel rather than Palestinians because basically you could take a huge amount of Palestinians when the Israeli economy was good to engage in, you know, labor in the country, and then when you didn't need them, you could just do away with them. How is any kind of meaningful society, after decades of occupation, decades of extreme violence, going to build something better, something good, something that's like different and meaningful? Because the PA have failed and they've denounced armed struggle. They haven't built something good for the general population. It's just a society that's like entirely reliant on the Palestinian Authority and people policing other Palestinians. It's not a meaningful existence. It's not like the kind of liberationary change that we're looking for. And there's no way that Palestinians could have made that in Gaza.
Okay, coming to tunnels. Whether or not the first tunnels were for smuggling, I don't even know if that's correct, because they were kidnapping people from 2005, 2006 from those tunnel crossings. They were using kidnapping. Also, one of the things they were smuggling was weapons. So it's like, yeah, they were made for smuggling, but the timeline is just off there. The withdrawal came in 2005. The crippling siege that you described wasn't imposed in its totality until 2007 after Hamas took over, as in it happened after the rockets, after the kidnappings, after the weapon smuggling. The fact is that it's not, there's a spectrum, okay? I'm not saying that Gaza could have become Singapore. It wasn't a state when Sharon pulled out, the formaldehyde, whatever. It wasn't a state when Sharon pulled out. It was a territory, but it was also a territory with a lot of international aid, more per head than most groups in the world get, as far as groups that require it. They could have built something other than 500 kilometers of tunnels. They could have built something other than massive weapon stockpiles or enough booby traps for insane wars worth thousands of buildings. They could have done something other than that, and they chose not to because, again, they didn't think. What did they think they were going to do with all these weapons and arms? Other than what? What was the expectation there of doing all that? Because they were launching attacks into Israel. They were still launching rockets. They were still kidnapping soldiers or kidnapping eventually civilians as well. That's what they were doing with those tunnels. Just because of the first one, even if the first ones were just for smuggling food or whatever, I'm still not even sure that's true. But assuming that's all it was for, then what were they for after that? They were not. That's not their primary purpose.
Defense.
It's not. What's defensive about Hamas? Hamas doesn't think that if you want to defend yourself against Israeli, who's more well defended, Gaza City or Ramallah? Ramallah doesn't have tunnels sprawling all the way underneath.
But who was better defended against like huge amounts of settler incursions into their land up until October the 7th? And even now, you know, it's a dangerous situation for an Israeli settler to go into Gaza. Like, seriously, so for example, in Vietnam, the reason that they dug tunnels, they were dug by families and stuff. It was to fight against the French occupation. Like, old people would throw away the dirt, kids would like grab it up, and people who understood how you did it would dig the tunnels.
No.
It was actually like a defensive operation because like this whole thing of like, well, Hamas stockpiled weapons for this or that. Israel stockpiled weapons for what? For mass killing? Because, you know, look, Israel at times has engaged in defensive wars, but like 1982 Lebanon, there's no argument of defense there. They invaded to break the back of the Palestinian national movement. Sharon lied to his own government vis-a-vis that. And Israel's history of engaging in huge massacres and mass killing campaigns in order to establish what it wants politically, it's not something new. And also, by the way, on the topic of like Hamas taking over, they won what was declared a free and fair election. They were allowed to stand by the West in an election. It was only after the results that the West were like, no, that can't happen. I believe there's a rather comical story that Condoleezza Rice fell off her treadmill when she heard the results because they did not think that Hamas had any chance of winning. And so I think like this kind of notion that, you know, Hamas just used all this money to build weaponry. Okay, fine. Yeah, they did do that. But simultaneously, I don't know what else they could have built. I don't know what you can build in one of the most densely populated places on earth that is subject to a crippling siege by both Egypt, by Israel, and where you basically cannot do anything. Like, you just cannot. There's not enough jobs. The influx of refugees after 1948 was even said. There's a UN representative who was like, it feels unlikely that Gaza will ever be able to support this number of people who came in. So you're kind of just building a society that is what? Reliant on aid from the international community forever? And Hamas builds what with that? They build a collaborationist society and get what? The Palestinian Authority? Like, I see what you're saying. Like, okay, they spent it all on weaponry. But I don't understand what else you think could have been that. I don't care if it's not Singapore. How do you look after a population of 2 million people with huge unemployment, with very limited natural resources? You know, the gas fields off Gaza, they weren't allowed those. They were found in, I think, 2004, 2003. They weren't allowed them. What is there? It's really hard for me to see what kind of meaningful life you could find in Gaza. Like, people did, don't get me wrong. But saying that you could, like, you know, do whatever there, that there could have been something really different, to me totally ignores, like, the history of occupation.
Okay. You said a few things there that I'm actually quite skeptical that you sincerely believe. One, tunnels were not built in Gaza to stop individual or lone settler groups from wandering in and trying to set up shop. There's no... If a settler wanted to... Yeah, the military infrastructure was... Yeah, okay, fine.
Sorry. But I just wanted to say, like, I'm not talking specifically about tunnels there, but I'm talking about building the capacity for, you know, like, armed resistance. So
rockets, RPGs, IEDs, like none of this is to deal with settlers, right? You need one or two guys with guns who are going to stop settlers. Like, Israel had no intention of sending settlers into Gaza after 2005.
But the settlers come with the army, right? Like, we know that. The settlers come with the army. You know that. But also, why did they have no intention of sending settlers in after 2005?
Yay.
Because they pulled them out? Because Sharon didn't want anything to do with the Israeli army actually being in Gaza anymore?
Because why?
Are we going to go into the context of the formaldehyde quote? Is that why? Is that what we're going for?
No. Just because I think that ultimately Hamas's logic and the logic of people there was like, look, it's costly when people actually stand up to you. When people have this capacity. It's easy to do things to defenseless populations where you've created a collaborationist regime. But it's not like, look, whatever Israel Israel has achieved over the last few years. It has not succeeded in destroying Hamas. Dismantling its offensive capabilities, yes, but dismantling Hamas as a resistance organization, I can't see it's been able to do that. I really cannot see it's been able to do that.
I mean, there have been much more sturdy militant groups that have been destroyed in the past. When it comes to Hamas and Gaza, yes, violence was one reason that they pulled out. The other reason that they pulled out, if you look at the broader context of that quote with the formaldehyde, was people believing at that point, people even within Sharon's government and even without, because obviously the public voted for him, was people even without the government were believing that there's just no opportunity to get a two-state solution back on the table with the Palestinian leadership. And they believed that if they wanted nothing to do with Gaza, yes, it was costly, also because Gaza just isn't that interesting to even extremist Jewish people. Like, you have to be really extreme to think that, it's not even, I think Gaza isn't even referenced in the Talmud as part of being Jewish. So they have very little interest in taking it the same way that they do for the West Bank. And also just because that was Sharon's way of saying, because again, remember, Sharon also had plans to converge. He wanted to pull out of the West Bank as well and to just leave it in the similar situation to Gaza. The convergence plan, it was called. They wanted that because they decided that their idea was to be neither the occupier but neither Sharon's position wanting a Palestinian state. So they would just pull out unilaterally and then just say, this is not our problem anymore. We're not interested. That's why they did it. There was not any risk of, and again, the army going in, that brings me to the next thing I'm not sure you agree with. You can take Sharon's pretext for going into 82 and say that it was false. It wasn't a PLO killing or a PLO assassination attempt in Europe. But do you sincerely think that Israel wouldn't have gone into Lebanon without the PLO being there? It's not that the PLO were never attacking Israel in the 70s and 80s. No, the Coastal Road Massacre came from the PLO in Lebanon.
I think they wanted to make a Christian Maronite state that was a desire that Ben Gurion expressed, that Dayan in his personal memoirs expressed, that it was a good idea to basically cleanse the south of Shia Lebanese and basically create a sympathetic Christian state from up beyond that point. I think Ben Gurion expresses it quite early and people are quite shocked, but Dayan also expressed it. And then since that point, I think Sharon was like, yeah, fuck it, we're going to do that. And I think that that's why they did it. I don't think they really cared about the PLO. I think that there's people who have made actually an even better point talking about Sethan Ziska. I think Sethan Ziska is a guy who I went to university with called Coulter Lowry's, I think his name is. That may be a mispronunciation, but he's written basically about the PLO, the fact that the PLO were like moving towards a two-state solution then. Sethan Ziska talks about it too. He's like, the PLO went on a diplomacy offensive. There's the famous speech by Arafat where he's like, I have the freedom fighters gun and the olive branch in one hand. Do not let the freedom fighters gun fall. And I think
okay, I'm bored. All right, great. Amazing talk. Okay, I've reached my limit. Thank you. Wow, epic content. Oh boy, okay.
You're a New York Times reader, NPR fan, and Daily Wire subscriber, or an avid consumer of all things Tucker Carlson. For several months now, there's been no avoiding the subject of Nick Fuentes. And let's be clear, the main reason you're hearing about him is because he's popular. A large number of people, especially young men, are interested in what he has to say. What that says about our society and our culture is the subject of ferocious debate. For many people, it's a grave indictment of an insidious immorality. For others, he's a product of a culture which has turned on its own and left many young people feeling listless and bitter. He's either a litmus test for right-wing hypocrisy on free speech or a talking manifestation of where the lines should be drawn. And a frankly preposterous amount of airtime has been spent on debating everything from his ideology to his sexuality and whether anyone should actually talk to him at all.
If I were writing a glossary entry on the Streisand effect, I wouldn't put a picture of her next to it. I would put a picture of Nick Fuentes.
They have opted to not do so when it comes to Nazis like Nick Fuentes.
Fuentes takes this guy apart brick by brick. It's a full takedown.
My concern is that people who are a bit more moderate are deeply alarmed by Nick Fuentes.
I was very happy to see that, like, Nick Fuentes really passed that test with flying colors.
That fragmentation is being caused purposefully by a splinter faction of people led by a young man named Nick Fuentes.
That's the war. Can you get the beef prices down? Not crazy things that Nick Fuentes or these other loons say on social media.
Well, it looks like all the screaming about Nick Fuentes on the internet is finally dying down a little bit.
So now we had on this guy, this Fuentes guy, and never challenged him.
You should have Nick Fuentes.
I wonder what Netanyahu's position is on Nick Fuentes.